So yesterday, I apparently blew up the internet. I blew up the internet because of something that I said on this show. What exactly did I say that blew up the internet? Well, I touched the political third rail. I talked about Social Security. Now, I know what you're thinking. What's so spicy about Social Security?
Ben Shapiro feeling some heat, expressing his opinion about Social Security and retirement. And is it fair that he's under fire for that opinion? Ben Shapiro is under fire right now for expressing his opinion about necessary Social Security reforms. And as usual, when Ben Shapiro is being attacked and maligned and name-called and criticized, as usual, it's not entirely fair. It might be this much fair, but it's certainly not entirely fair. First, let's take a look at the segment from yesterday's Ben Shapiro show that is called into question here.
And let's be real about this. It's insane that we haven't raised the retirement age in the United States. It's totally crazy. Joe Biden, if that were the case, Joe Biden should not be running for president. Hey, Joe Biden is 81 years old. The retirement age in the United States at which you start to receive Social Security and you are eligible for Medicare is 65. Joe Biden has technically been eligible for Social Security and Medicare for 16 years, and he wants to continue in office until he is 86, which is 19 years past when he would be eligible for retirement. No one in the United States should be retiring at 65 years old. Frankly, I think retirement itself is a stupid idea unless you have some sort of health problem. Everybody that I know who is elderly, who has retired, is dead within 5 years. And if you talk to people who are elderly and they lose their purpose in life by losing their job and they stop working, things go to hell in a handbasket real quick. But put all of that aside, just on a fiscal level and on a logical level. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt established 65 as the retirement age, the average life expectancy in the United States was 63 years old. Today, the average life expectancy in the United States is close to 80. It's totally insane that you believe that you should be able to work from the time that you are essentially 20 to the time that you are 65, which is a 45-year period, pay in, and then you will receive Social Security benefits sufficient to support you and your family, you and your wife or whatever, for like another 20 years. That's crazy talk. That is not fiscally sustainable. The notion that if you have to raise the retirement age to 67 or 68, that everyone is going to fall apart. My parents are that age. My parents are not retired. And they shouldn't retire. It would be very bad for them to retire. By the way, it's disrespectful to people who are 67, 68, 69 years old to suggest that they are in the same shape as people who are 65 were in 1940. It's not true at all. Have you met a 65-year-old lately? 65-year-olds are not old in the United States. They're not. 68-year-olds are not old in the United States. Again, Joe Biden thinks he's not old, and that dude is running for president again, and that dude actually is old, and he's 81. I failed to see how a country in which our entire leadership class is 80 plus is telling you that we should have a retirement age of 65. It makes no sense at all.
All right. So maybe now you can see why there is a little bit of pushback on Ben. And it's not really about the idea of raising the retirement age, or it's really more about the portion in the middle there where he said that he thinks it's crazy. No one in America should be retiring at any age. He thinks that it's bad for people to retire. It ends up hurting them. Things to go to hell in a handbasket when somebody retires. That's what's being criticized here. So let's break this down. And we love Ben Shapiro over here. I think he's great. I personally love him like a family member. I've known him for so long. We worked together back when both of our careers were starting out here in the world of conservative political commentary. And he's usually right. And in this case, he is right, except for the way he expressed his ideas. I think that's the difference here. Because what people hear is, oh, this is some elitist little snot-nosed kid who just sits on his butt all day and expresses his opinion. Well, sure, it's easy for you to work until you're 80 and drop dead behind the microphone. But what about bricklayers? And what about construction workers? And what about, and that's what they take away. And so expressed in a more delicate way, taking that into account probably would have mitigated the pushback that he got. But the fact of the matter is he's 100% right. He's 100% right about the origins of Social Security. In fact, I would add one more factoid to Franklin Roosevelt starting Social Security in the first place. It was sold to the American people as something that would help widows and orphans whose husbands and fathers died without leaving them anything. That tugged on the heartstrings of generous Americans. And by the way, I'll also add Christian Americans who know that the New Testament is replete with calls from Jesus and the apostles to help who? Widows and orphans. Go look it up. Jesus talks about it all the time. And so Roosevelt, along with Democrats and some Republicans, said, yeah, okay, you know what? Let's do this. Let's help the widows and orphans. Very quickly, it was transformed into a national pension plan for all Americans. And yes, at the time of the 65 retirement age, the life expectancy was right around 65, actually. So he's 100% right about that. 100% right, unequivocally. And anybody who denies the fact that Social Security needs to be fixed or readjusted, reimagined, whether that's private retirement accounts and something that looks more like a 401k account, which is something George W. Bush was campaigning on in 2000 until he was demonized by Al Gore and the Democrats, whether that idea or raising the retirement age or somehow modifying the way Social Security is dispersed, if you're denying that reality, you're denying math. It's 100% true. But the idea that it's wrong to retire in the first place, the idea that it's a bad idea that we should encourage retirement, I think that's worth debating. I think this is a very American idea that if you're not working, if you don't have a job to go to, that in some way you are not contributing to the betterment of our planet or our culture or our society, that in some way you should be ashamed of the fact that you're not going to work every day and earning a paycheck to help a business or a corporation. That's a very American idea. It's also, since I raised the idea of Christianity, it's a very Protestant idea. This is a Protestant dominated culture we live in here in America. If you go to a Catholic country, Catholics sort of invented the whole work-life balance. It isn't a major dominant moral priority in Catholicism to work hard and contribute and be a good member of society. That's a very Protestant idea. It's very German. And it was brought here to America and became sort of something that we take great pride in. Yes, we work hard, and those crazy Europeans have 4 weeks vacation or more. Guess what? We're not necessarily 100% in the right on that one. We could use a little bit more of an idea that you can bring value and worth to your society and your culture by doing things that go well beyond just showing up and punching a clock and being a Walmart greeter. That said, Ben is correct in pointing out that when people retire, they do in America start to lose their purpose. Well, let's look at some of the pushback that Ben received. And most specifically, the pushback we're going to show you is pushback that he directly responded to. This first one comes from John Daniel Davidson. By the way, this is criticism on the right. John Davidson is a writer at The Federalist, good conservative commentator. He responded to the video of Ben Shapiro saying, this is the kind of thing a person says who doesn't know anyone who does blue-collar work for a living. See, there you go. We knew this was going to be one of the responses. If you're a mason or carpenter or roofer or plumber or electrician, anyone who uses their body and back for a living, then yes, at some point before age 70, you'll want to retire. Ben responded and said, I literally said, unless you have some sort of health problem, which would generally be the case if you've been working as a roofer for 45 years. But I would add to this, I don't think it's just, this isn't just a class thing. Let me tell you something. I know a lot of lawyers who have worked for 30, 40 years as a lawyer. You know, the life of a lawyer is not just sitting on your butt and taking meetings and then collecting huge paychecks. They put in 60, 70 billable hours, even at a ripe old age of 70, if they're partners. They want out. It's stressful. Okay, white collar work doesn't mean you're not undergoing severe health strains at a certain age when you're putting in high level work at a stressful job. And we don't necessarily need to hold that up as the ideal or in some way shame people if they're like, yo, you know what? I want to sit on a beach. I've earned it. That being said, the government doesn't necessarily have to subsidize you sitting on that beach, depending on what kind of tropical drink you're enjoying. Emily Zanotti, who actually used to work for Ben over at Daily Wire. She's now a conservative commentator. I think her byline might be at Fox Digital. I'm not sure, but she's great. I love Emily. She says, a job is not a purpose. You don't need to have a job to have purpose, nor does your job need to consume your life to such a degree that without it, life becomes devoid of meaning. Social Security can be a Ponzi scheme, but we also deserve to live good lives in our old age, he went on to say, which is kind of the point I'm making. Ben agrees. But Ben says specifically, depression rates for those who drop out of the workplace or retire are extraordinarily high. You don't need a job to have a purpose, but our society has also destroyed nearly every other alternative source of purpose. Churches decline. The elderly are sheltered off to homes, not integrated into an intergenerational family structure. He's right. And here's the thing, they're all right. We're all sort of agreeing on the same thing. It's just a question of how we present the idea and how we expand what we see in our society as providing purpose. I mentioned an American mindset versus a European mindset. There's another aspect of this that needs to be addressed, and that is our relationship with the elderly. The elderly. There's another word for the elderly, for our parents, for our grandparents. You know, it's not normal in other Western cultures and Western societies that children and grandchildren live far away from the patriarchs and matriarchs of their families. And when they reach a certain age that they can't care for themselves, well, they're just put into a home. It's not normal in Western civilization, in other cultures other than America, that the assumption is the government will somehow take care of all of the needs of the elderly, of our parents and our grandparents, the patriarchs and matriarchs of our families. No, we need to reintroduce and reaffirm in American culture that our grandparents, our scions of our families, they should be a part of our lives on a daily basis. They should be a part of our families and a part of our homes. They should be a part of raising our children and our grandchildren. That if they have health problems, it isn't immediately a problem for somebody else to take care of at a home, but instead they come and live with us in our homes. That sounds extraordinary to many people here in America, but it's not elsewhere. Part of why it's become such a norm in this country, well, you guessed it, because there's big business behind it. All of those homes that we didn't used to have, these homes, these complexes or these subdivisions and little city complexes that become places where people who are old go to wait for death. There's major corporations behind them, major housing corporations that created these things and encourage this kind of living. And in some way, we, our generation who just see our parents as a burden, we buy into it so that they're not our problem to deal with. What the hell has happened to us? I think these are all the issues that Ben and Emily and John are sort of touching on at the same time in a faux argument that doesn't need to be had. Now, Ben today came back to his show just about an hour ago, and he responded specifically to some of the charges because it became a really big deal yesterday. So, I mean, Ben doesn't need me to speak for himself. He's pretty good at this sort of thing. Let's watch Ben.
This is considered the third rail of politics. And as I said in the show yesterday, Donald Trump hasn't touched it. He's the first Republican in a long time to have basically said the entitlements are off the table. We're not going to do anything about them. And I've said before, that's a smart political move. But smart political moves aren't necessarily good for the country. Both parties now argue that we can't touch Social Security. We can't touch Medicare. We can't touch Medicaid. The entitlement programs basically have to stay. The problem with that is that, of course, they're all going to go bankrupt. So politicians obviously have an incentive to keep kicking the can down the road and pretending that we have unlimited borrowing power and limited money to pay for a ballooning public debt. That, of course, is their incentive structure. But I'm not running for office, so I can tell you the truth, which is that if we don't raise the retirement age or privatize Social Security over time or make any changes to Social Security, we will go insolvent. Social Security is not, in fact, a lockbox. I saw a lot of tweets yesterday from people saying, I paid into Social Security. I'm just taking out what I got in. No, you're not. You absolutely are not. The government stole your money and paid it to somebody else. And now they're stealing somebody else's money and paying it to you. And I promise you that whatever you paid in is certainly not what you're getting out. You're either getting out way less. In my case, you're getting way less in Social Security, if ever you receive it, than you paid in. And in many cases, you're receiving far more. So my grandmother, for example, receiving Social Security, got way more than she paid in because Social Security is not a defined, it is not a defined contributions plan. It's a defined benefits plan. Right? Social Security tells you how much you receive, but it has nothing to do with how much you put in. Social Security is a pyramid scheme. It is a Ponzi scheme. We are taking out trillions of dollars in debt to fund people retiring from work who are not somehow unable to work. That was the point that I'm making, is that many of the people that we are paying not to work right now, who are 65 years old, yes, they paid into the system, but that is because the system should not have taken their money in the first place.
100% right. And it's undeniable. Like I said, if you deny that, you deny math, right? And the only reason you would deny it is for political purposes. That's why Joe Biden was mentioning it in his State of the Union address, that he screamed at the American people. He said Republicans are trying to kill Social Security. They're not. In fact, Republicans, any Republican who has mentioned reforming Social Security in the last 4 years have actually proposed ideas that are less radical than then Senator Joe Biden proposed back in the 90s. But you won't hear that analysis on cable news because, after all, the people on cable news have an election to win. Then Ben walked into the point that he made in the first place, which is whether it's even a good idea to encourage retirement at all.
The point that I was making yesterday is that I do not think that as a general rule, it is good for people to consider themselves retired from the world. I don't think that it's good. Retirement, particularly in the post-familial, post-church age, harms mental health. It robs people of purpose. Again, I'm not saying that you can't retire if you want to. If you have the money to do so, go for it if you want to. And I'm also not saying you should be forced not to retire if you can afford to retire. I'm making the case that actually early retirement, by the data, tends to harm your health, that working longer tends to be good for you. That is the argument that I'm making. Again, not that you should be forced to work if you don't want to, and you can afford to do it, or your family will take care of you. The argument that I was making is that when you are 65 years old, if you retire, if you make that decision to retire, that's a decision that you should take really seriously. And this bizarre idea that the best thing you can do, so much that the government should sponsor it, is retire. And when I say retire, I don't mean get an alternative job. Okay, you're not retired. If you quit your job at 65, or you are forcibly retired by your company at 65, and then you take Social Security, and then you have another job, which is what a lot of people do, you're not retired. You're retired from that job. You're not a retired person. Okay, the effects of the retirement I'm talking about is you retire from your job and all jobs, and you live on your pension or your Social Security. That tends not to be good for people in terms of health.
So he's saying the same thing. He's just sort of nuancing it and expanding it a little bit, and that's fine. And he's probably not wrong if, in fact, you can afford to not retire or retire. It's all about whether you financially are in a place where you can do this or not, right? And depending on the kind of job that you've got. I mean, garbage men probably don't want to be doing what they're doing at 70. Police officers probably don't want to, but probably shouldn't be doing what they're doing at 70. We as a society, for the most part, have understood that compact with people who have jobs like that. And since they're necessary government workers, we have provided pretty healthy retirement benefits for police officers or firemen whose bodies go through quite a bit. Their brains go through quite a bit of stress. And by the way, we as a society want firemen and police officers who are not in their 70s having to, go into a burning building and carry out, a full-grown man who's burning alive. That's how it all works, right? Of course, right. All right, we'll let Ben finish it up here, and then I've got some final thoughts.
What I'm hearing from people is sort of this left-wing argument that has now horseshoed around to some parts of the right, and that is that work is joyless and soul-deadening, particularly blue-collar work, which actually seems elitist to me. Right? I mean, I'm hearing a lot of people who are like, well, of course you want to continue working until you're old and gray, but that's because you sit behind a desk and you talk. Yes, I like my job. That's true. I love my job, and I've worked hard to get this job, and we employ 300 people at this company, which means that we are responsible for the support of thousands of dependents. I love that. That's great. I plan to work until I can no longer work, literally until I can't. Okay, but I don't understand why that wouldn't also be true of, say, an electrician or, say, a plumber or a guy who started off as a bricklayer in a bricklaying business, now owns the bricklaying business. That seems kind of actually elitist to me. That the same logic of fulfillment doesn't apply to people who are blue collar. I know a lot of people who are electricians and are approaching retirement age. Many of them don't want to retire. They like being an electrician. And in fact, they feel useless if they do retire. And here's my real question. If you really believe that work is inherently degrading and joyless, even certain sectors of work, it's inherently degrading and joyless and terrible. So then what does an ideal retirement age look like? What you're really arguing against is the work itself. You're not really arguing about the retirement age. What you're really arguing against is the work itself.
Yes and no. And this is where I'm going to have to part company with Ben, because he's right. It's not in it does sound like an elitist thing when you say white collar versus blue collar. That's why I raised the issue of lawyers who I know personally a lawyer who's been a lawyer for about 30 years. He's a partner. He's been working his butt off. He is so done. He is so fried. He is so finished with it. And he can't wait to retire because it's draining his soul. It's frying his brain. He wants to get out. This isn't a white collar, blue collar thing, but Ben needs to recognize that he is incredibly, can I use this word? Privileged. He is privileged to do not just what he does, he's privileged to do what he loves. That's the exception, not the rule. There's a reason why people call it a job, because they gotta go to work. And I think there's a ton of people who end up doing work because they have to, not because they want to. And by the way, because we have to have them do those jobs for us, because our society needs it and demands it. And so therefore, in a free market economy, the structure is set that those dirty jobs that Mike Rowe made a living highlighting, they get paid pretty well because nobody else wants to do them. But it doesn't mean you have to like it. You don't have to love crawling through a sewage pipe to make it so that people can defecate in a major city without any sort of clogs going on. That was my favorite Mike Rowe episode, and I think there were about 8 of them. Of course, they didn't like that work, but they did it because it was what they did. And then when they left the work at home or at the office or in the sewage pipe. I think it's naive to not recognize that probably the majority of people in this country and really around the world work because they have to, and they have the jobs that they have because they have to. It's sadly a miserable existence, and we try not to highlight it too much because we'd all be depressed and despair for it. I'm glad that Ben wants to keep doing what he does until the day he can't do it anymore. I want Ben to keep doing what he does until he can't do it anymore because we need his voice. We need his brain. We need his opinion. We need his activism. We need his energy. Just like Rush Limbaugh, who did it until he literally couldn't do it anymore. Listen, very few of us are in this privileged position. I plan on doing what I'm doing until I can't do it anymore, although I will be doing it from that tropical beach. That's the beauty of what we do. In fact, for all you know, I'm in a beach resort right now. And as soon as we're done, I'm going to walk right out there and go surfing. The point of the matter is it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. And what Ben said yesterday was, well, let's just say inartful. The larger issue here has to do with what we in America are going to do about Social Security, not whether we should have a retirement or whether we should encourage retirement or whether we should discourage retirement. That's very much a personal thing, and people need to be able to handle it however they want. Social Security is broken, absolutely, and it needs to be fixed. And in fixing it, we need to honor those who have actually bought into the compact the government has made with them over the decades, and then redefine that compact for the people like maybe Ben's age and even younger who will never be able to enjoy any aspect of that compact. We need courageous leaders to be able to say that. And I bet you any money that if Ben could have it to say all over again, he wouldn't say what he said yesterday the way he said it. But he did. And the beauty is he has the ability to, well, redefine the parameters of the discussion that he started. The important point here is, though, it's an important discussion that he started, and I'm glad we're having it. I hope our elected officials, our leaders, our politicians, they pick up on the conversation too.